let's just rewind a little bit. I've had this Sony FX6 for about a year and a half. It has been a really good camera. I've got massive respect for it. I've got massive ratings for it. But there are some good things, some bad things, and I'll walk you through them one step at a time. So, here it is. Now, let's start with one of the most important ones for filmmaking, and something that everybody's bothered about is image quality. What does the image look like? It has 10-bit 422. It has the Cinetone profile, which you can use, which is absolutely perfect if you're doing anything corporate or fast turnaround or talking head. In addition to that, it has the Cine mode, where you can go and get the extra dynamic range using that S-Log3 picture profile as well. Straight out the camera, these colors look pretty spot on the Cinetone picture profile. I've had a few shots in over here. So if you're doing lots of run and gun documentary, or you're doing quite a lot of corporate work where you're kind of turning up, sticking a camera, you would need it for a fast turnaround. This is really, really good. The other benefit is if you are on that fast turnaround time, it's also got some great internal features like the internal ND, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail later. But when talking picture profile and you're looking to shoot things that are a bit more cinematic, things that are like short films, I think there are some limitations there. I've shot some short doc footage with this and we went for a really cinematic look. Honestly, I like the footage, but something like a Blackmagic cinema camera or a Red Komodo, which is a similar kind of price range, putting the footage side by side, an expert can see the difference. A noob definitely couldn't, but there is very little subtleties which mean that this camera does fit the bill for those corporate gigs, for those commercial gigs. So something which is going to be an advert, then it's absolutely perfect. If you're really looking for that cinema-y look, then you know the red Komodo is going to give you a better result. So if you're exclusively shooting short films or things of that manner, maybe this isn't the camera for you in terms of the image quality. However, if you are an individual that does lots of different types of shoots, so you might do a bit of wedding, a bit of corporate, commercial, short film, if you're a very varied filmmaker, if you want a camera with image quality that can do lots of different things, this could be the one for you. If you're wanting something specifically with a real cinematic look and your main focus is to shoot short films, then maybe there's other better options for you. Okay, so number 2, let's talk about ease of use. Now, before I got this camera, I was exclusively shooting on Canons. I'd only used Canon DSLRs, I'd only used Canon cinema cameras. So I came from a C100 and I'd used the C200 as well. Now, I've got to be honest, when I first picked up this camera and I was navigating my way around it, I felt like a complete rookie again. It felt quite complicated. So if you've not used the Sony system before, it does take a little bit of getting used to. But I mean, that's the same for any camera. With, say, a Canon, for instance, where they're just known for that super easy, user-friendly user interface, picking up one of their systems and making it work straight away is pretty straightforward to do. This, if you do buy it, one thing I would just say is give yourself a bit of time to understand the menu systems, go out and play with it, get a handle of the camera before you go jumping onto a set and doing something professionally with a client, because it takes a little bit of getting used to if you haven't been on a Sony cinema camera system before. Okay, so let's talk next about some of the internal tools, the things that you use on this that I think make a really big difference. In terms of where the buttons are laid out, it is very traditional for a cinema camera. So if you have used another cinema camera, it's not going to be too different. It has an internal ND. Now for me, I absolutely love an internal ND. When I got my first cinema camera, C100, I was absolutely ecstatic that it had it in there. Now the internal ND on this just takes it an extra notch above anything that I've seen. It's got a variable ND slider here, so you can scroll it up and down, but it also has this feature, the auto ND. The auto ND essentially is bit of technology within the camera which enables the camera to automatically scale up or down the ND based on the light that's around, so it's always exposed. So if you're in an environment where you're going from somewhere super light to super dark and you have a camera on a gimbal or you're run and gun and you just need something quick, this camera can take away that pain of like, I'm running around, I'm getting the shot and then shit, I'm a little bit overexposed or I'm underexposed, I've got to quickly adjust this. Or even with another ND where you have to flick it up and then you get the whole. So if you're doing run and gun stuff, that is super, super handy. Have I used it that much? Honestly, no. When the camera first came out and I found out about that feature, I was super pumped about it. I thought, this is something I'll use all the time. But in reality, if you've got something on a tripod, you're not going to use it, you're just going to expose it properly. If you've got something on a gimbal, yes, it can be handy, but you're kind of thinking about, this is the shot that I'm going to capture. So before you capture the shot, you're going to dial in your settings. Now, for me personally, I found with the Auto ND, sometimes it can be a bit too aggressive because it's always trying to make sure that the highlights are exposed. If you're in an environment where it is very contrasty, you can completely lose your shadows. So it's just something to be aware of. For me personally, I have used it on occasions when I have done run and gun stuff, but have I used it as much as I thought? No. So if you're thinking about this as a key factor to buy the camera, I wouldn't hold it in too much high regard. But having the variable ND where you can scroll it up and down, super helpful. Another key thing that I think is absolutely brilliant in this and makes your life super easy as a filmmaker is the autofocus. The autofocus is pretty powerful. It can be used for face detection, eye detection. It's pretty sticky when it gets on there. By and large, I've got no complaints. I think it does a great job. You can pull focus fast on a face or not a face. It's comparative and competitive to Canon's autofocus system, which is really saying something and shows how far Sony has come along in the last 5 years. So my one small gripe is sometimes that face auto detection can be a bit too good. I'll give you a quick example. Literally about 5 days ago, I was filming an event with a couple of colleagues. I was manning this camera, getting the wide shot of people doing keynote talks on a stage. It was a standing room, and as a result, there were people milling about sometimes during these talks. When everybody's head's facing towards the stage, the only head that can get grabbed for the focus is that of the speaker. But as soon as somebody turns around to go to the toilet to drop off a steamy shit, they turn around, they're walking across the trajectory of the camera, it's a closer face, it locks it and it pulls that focus away from what I was paying attention to on the stage. Just turn off the autofocus, put it into manual focus. If there's lots of faces in the room, that is a risk and you're looking at something which is far away and you're relying on the face autofocus, I wouldn't use it. Next up, let's talk about form factor, size and portability of this camera. It's pretty great in terms of its size, in my opinion. It is very much a compact cinema camera. Well, FX9 would maybe be an extra third on top of this. Your Canon C300s are a bigger form factor as well. I am personally a big fan of these compact cinema cameras. I think they offer flexibility and, you know, if you're holding it on set, doing the handheld stuff, it's got enough weight to get rid of that handheld jitter, but it's also not so heavy that it's gonna just drain your arms out by carrying it all day. It has a really nice side handle here. It's very ergonomic. It's good for, well, being a side handle and helping you get that extra stability. Top handle comes on there as well. I've seen a lot of people rigging this out and putting a different top handle on it. Don't know why they're doing that unless they just don't give a about capturing any audio, because I'll come on to audio in a second, but there is a limiting factor in terms of the XLRs in here. Overall, the form factor of it is really good in my opinion. It's small, it's not actually too heavy. When it's built up and rigged like this, it's pretty well balanced. Sometimes I'll add a couple of extra weights on the back here. Wait a second. Couple of these bad boys. There's loads of 1/4" threads throughout the camera, so for rigging it's really handy. I've just got these couple of small rig weights, and if you've got a heavy lens like the 24-70, which I'm shooting on this A7 III there, it's really good. It just keeps the camera nicely balanced in the center. So obviously it's not balanced now, but when it's got a big heavy lens on it, it's really nicely balanced. So I would recommend getting some of these, not only for the reason of doing handheld, getting a bit of extra weight and getting that balance, but also for another key factor. So the form factor of this camera, you would think would make it more friendly for gimbals, but I had some massive problems with it in terms of gimbals. Prior to buying this, the gimbal that I was using was a DJI Ronin S, the first edition. What I found with that is I could get this camera on the gimbal, and with a 24-70mm, which is the one that I like to shoot with, the lens that I like to shoot with most often, if I put that on, because this body here by itself is actually quite light. So if you're wanting to put a heavier lens on the front of this and you're using a gimbal which is more for a DSLR, you don't have enough clearance to balance the camera on the rear of the gimbal. It requires some of these. Now when you put these on, so I'd like plonk them either side here to add a little bit more weight to the back of the camera, then you're increasing the payload of the entire camera. Once you put the monitor on it and all that jazz, you won't be able to go in underslung mode, and you're probably going to be at risk of damaging the motors. And trust me, I've tried it, so just take my word for it. It does work, but the gimbal doesn't like it. The gimbal says,
"Please stop it, it's hurting me,"
and flops the camera forward, and then, you know, lens could get smashed, all that kind of stuff. So balancing it on a gimbal, especially a gimbal that is more of a DSLR gimbal, the prosumer end, just bear that in mind, because the chunky back of this and the fact that this is light, if you want to put any heavyish lens on it, you're going to have a nightmare trying to balance it. You want anything half decent, a 16 to 35 G master, 24 to 70 G master, forget about it. They're heavier lenses, and it just knocks it off kill, and you're running a risk of damaging that gimbal. The workaround that I found, and the one that seemed to fit the bill in the market without spending £7,000 on it, is the Zion Crane 3. Let's go with that. Whew. This is the Crane 3. As you can see, I've also got an extension on it there, and that just gives extra clearance. Now, when I put the gimbal on this, it balances perfectly. This gimbal is a little bit less friendly in terms of its ergonomics and usability compared to the DJIs. However, it can get the camera on, and it can do everything that you need it to do. So this can be a solution to fly your gimbal on. It does work. I've also seen Finetech, I'll put it up here. This gimbal fly the FX6 without any problems, but for me, this one with that extra clearance at the bottom just fit the bill. Okay, next up, let's talk about connectivity for audio. Now, this is one big gripe of mine about this camera. I mentioned earlier, I've seen people rigging this out with cages and top handles, and it looks super cool, but it's really not very practical at all. If you want to capture audio on this camera and you want it to be half decent, the only option that you have is to use these XLR ports here. There's no option to plug in any kind of Rode VideoMic Pro or anything like that. The only way that you can connect high quality audio to this camera is through these two XLR ports, which are on this top handle here, and that's it. If you're gonna rig this camera and you're gonna use it with an easy rig, for example, you're gonna do some run and gun style documentary, you're gonna be fly on the wall, whatever it may be, then that's fine. Like, you're gonna have the top handle on it anyway. But it does mean you are limited, and you always have to have this top handle. If you wanted something different, something a bit more metal and meaty and heavier, forget about it, because you won't get any audio into it. So you are stuck with this top handle. I've got no problems with the top handle, but if you wanted something a little bit more higher build quality, something a bit more sturdy, then you can't. And that's just how it is. When it comes to flying this camera on a gimbal, there are occasions where you are going to want to capture audio. Recently we did a gig with Aston Villa where Steven Gerrard came out and did a surprise appearance to a load of people. It was great. I'm an Aston Villa football fan, so it made my entire day. But when doing that, I had the camera rigged up on the gimbal, the Crane 3. I also needed to capture audio of this whole thing happening. I'll put a little image of how the rig looked on screen now. It was super heavy for the day, and the only way for me to capture audio whilst flying this on a gimbal was to have this top handle on. So the practicality and the difficulty in balancing it with monitors on it and having to have the top handle is a massive pain in the ass. If most of the time you're shooting handheld or you've got your gimbal on a tripod, camera on a tripod, it's not gonna bother you whatsoever. But if you wanna fly this camera on a gimbal and you wanna capture audio, it's a nightmare unless you get one of those and you are as wham as Arnie. So last couple of things. First one, presence. It can sound a bit snobby, and you hear it all the time where people are like, well, a DSLR or a mirrorless, the same pitch quality that comes out of it can come out of this. This is essentially an A7R4 in terms of its spec, but in a cinema camera body. So the question would be, why don't you just turn up with a small mirrorless camera and then also have that compact form factor, and you can take cameras, and you can take photos. No, it just depends on what kind of person you are. You're a freelancer, you're running a professional video agency. I'm running a professional video agency, so we deal with large clients, and if we turn up on set and everything was mirrorless cameras, I think our clients would feel a little bit hard done by based on what we've charged them for it. When we do turn up on set with this camera, it always gets attention. People like how it looks. They think that they're in safe hands. It's a credible, modern, sleek design of a camera, and people like it. Does it mean it can create a better image than an A7R4? Maybe a tiny little bit with the specs within it, but really, is anybody going to be able to tell? No. But the practicalities of what comes in it to make it functional, e.g. that variable built-in ND, the XLR inputs for high quality audio, and also the form factor of it being that bit bigger so you can get those nice handheld shots and it doesn't look so jittery, I think really make this camera stand out and make it be a solid camera and gives it lots of presence on set. So would I recommend this bad boy? Yes. I would wholeheartedly recommend this camera. It's been a workhorse. It's delivered on all of the needs that I've needed it to deliver on in terms of for corporate and commercial work. You get really good image quality. The form factor is really nice. There's lots of extra features. It takes a bit of getting used to if you haven't been on the Sony camera system before, but in my opinion, this is a standout camera and I couldn't recommend it more highly. If you're thinking of purchasing one, do it. I promise you, you won't regret it. As always, thank you for watching these videos. If you enjoyed it, I'd be really grateful if you'd hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, drop a comment on there. These things all make a massive, massive difference, and I'm really grateful and appreciative of those that do leave those on there, because it makes a huge difference to this channel and helping us grow. If you want more video content, educational content, the business of video, how to make money making video, check out some of the videos that are on screen here, or have a look at my channel. All the support is really, really appreciated. But for now, take it easy. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Safe.